Chapter 23. Travis is Arrested. Jim Travis advanced into the bank with a doubtful step, knowing well that he was on a dishonest errand, and heartily wishing that he were well out of it. After a little hesitation, he approached the paying teller, and exhibiting the bank book, said,
"I want to get my money out."
The bank officer took the book, and after looking at it a moment, said, "How much do you want?"
"The whole of it," said Travis.
"You can draw out any part of it, but to draw out the whole requires a week's notice."
"Then I'll take $100.
"Are you the person to whom the book belongs?"
"Yes, sir,"
said Travis, without hesitation.
"Your name is?"
"Hunter."
The bank clerk went to a large folio volume, containing the names of depositors, and began to turn over the leaves. While he was doing this, he managed to send out a young man connected with the bank for a policeman. Travis did not perceive this, or did not suspect that it had anything to do with himself. Not being used to savings banks, he supposed the delay only what was usual. After a search, which was only intended to gain time that a policeman might be summoned, the cashier came back, and sliding out a piece of paper to Travis, said,
"It will be necessary for you to write out an order for the money."
Travis took a pen, which he found on the ledge outside, and wrote the order, signing his name Dick Hunter, having observed that name on the outside of the book.
"Your name is Dick Hunter, then?"
said the cashier, taking the paper and looking at the thief over his spectacles.
"Yes," said Travis promptly.
"But," continued the cashier, "I find Hunter's age is put down on the bank book at 14. Surely you must be more than that."
Travis would gladly have declared that he was only 14, but being in reality 23, and possessing a luxuriant pair of whiskers, this was not to be thought of. He began to feel uneasy.
"Dick Hunter's my younger brother," he said. "I'm getting out the money for him."
"I thought you said your own name was Dick Hunter," said the cashier.
"I said my name was Hunter," said Travis ingeniously. "I didn't understand you."
"But you've signed the name of Dick Hunter to this order. How is that?"
questioned the troublesome cashier. Travis saw that he was getting himself into a tight place, but his self-possession did not desert him.
"I thought I must give my brother's name," he answered.
"What is your own name?"
"Henry Hunter."
"Can you bring anyone to testify that the statement you are making is correct?"
"Yes, a dozen if you like," said Travis boldly. "Give me the book, and I'll come back this afternoon. I didn't think there'd be such a fuss about getting out a little money."
"Wait a moment. Why don't your brother come himself?"
"Because he's sick. He's down with the measles," said Travis.
Here the cashier signed to Dick to rise and show himself. Our hero accordingly did so.
"You will be glad to find that he has recovered,"
said the cashier, pointing to Dick. With an exclamation of anger and dismay, Travis, who saw the game was up, started for the door, feeling that safety made such a course prudent. But he was too late. He found himself confronted by a burly policeman, who seized him by the arm, saying,
"Not so fast, my man. I want you." "Let me go,"
exclaimed Travis, struggling to free himself.
"I'm sorry I can't oblige you," said the officer. "You'd better not make a fuss, or I may have to hurt you a little."
Travis sullenly resigned himself to his fate, darting a look of rage at Dick, whom he considered the author of his present misfortune.
"This is your book,"
said the cashier, handing back his rightful property to our hero.
"Do you wish to draw out any money?"
$2, said Dick.
"Very well. Write an order for the amount."
Before doing so, Dick, who now that he saw Travis in the power of the law began to pity him, went up to the officer and said, "Won't you let him go? I've got my bank book back, and I don't want anything done to him."
"Sorry I can't oblige you," said the officer, "but I'm not allowed to do it. He'll have to stand his trial."
"I'm sorry for you, Travis," said Dick. "I didn't want you arrested. I only wanted my bank book back."
"Curse you," said Travis, scowling vindictively. "Wait till I get free. See if I don't fix you."
"You needn't pity him too much," said the officer.
"I know him now. He's been to the island before." "It's a lie," said Travis violently.
"Don't be too noisy, my friend," said the officer.
"If you've got no more business here, we'll be going."
He withdrew with the prisoner in charge, and Dick, having drawn his $2, left the bank. Notwithstanding the violent words the prisoner had used towards himself, and his attempted robbery, he could not help feeling sorry that he had been instrumental in causing his arrest. "I'll keep my book a little safer hereafter," thought Dick. "Now I must go and see Tom Wilkins." Before dismissing the subject of Travis and his theft, it may be remarked that he was duly tried, and his guilt being clear, was sent to Blackwell's Island for 9 months. At the end of that time, on his release, he got a chance to work his passage on a ship to San Francisco, where he probably arrived in due time. At any rate, nothing more has been heard of him, and probably his threat of vengeance against Dick will never be carried into effect. Returning to the City Hall Park, Dick soon fell in with Tom Wilkins. "How are you, Tom?" he said. "How's your mother?"
"She's better, Dick. Thank you. She felt worried about being turned out into the street, but I gave her that money from you, and now she feels a good deal easier."
"I've got some more money for you, Tom," said Dick, producing a $2 bill from his pocket.
"I ought not to take it from you, Dick."
"Oh, it's all right, Tom. Don't be afraid."
"But you may need it yourself."
"There's plenty more where that came from."
"Anyway, $1 will be enough. With that we can pay the rent."
"You'll want the other to buy something to eat."
"You're very kind, Dick."
"I'd ought to be. I've only got myself to take care of."
"Well, I'll just take it for my mother's sake. When you want anything done, just call on Tom Wilkins."
"All right. Next week, if your mother doesn't get better, I'll give you some more." Tom thanked our hero very gratefully, and Dick walked away, feeling the self-approval which always accompanies a generous and disinterested action. He was generous by nature, and before the period at which is introduced to the reader's notice, he frequently treated his friends to cigars and oyster stews. Sometimes he invited them to accompany him to the theater at his expense, but he never derived from these acts of liberality the same degree of satisfaction as from this timely gift to Tom Wilkins. He felt that his money was well bestowed, and would save an entire family from privation and discomfort. $5 would, to be sure, make something of a difference in the amount of his savings. It was more than he was able to save up in a week. But Dick felt fully repaid for what he had done, and he felt prepared to give as much more, if Tom's mother should continue to be sick, and should appear to him to need it. Besides all this, Dick felt a justifiable pride in his financial ability to afford so handsome a gift. A year before, however much he would have desired to give, it would have been quite out of his power to give $5. His cash balance never reached that amount. It was seldom indeed that it equaled $1. In more ways than one, Dick was beginning to reap the advantage of his self-denial and judicious economy. It will be remembered that when Mr. Whitney, at parting with Dick, presented him with $5, he told him that he might repay it to some other boy who was struggling upward. Dick thought of this, and it occurred to him that after all he was only paying up an old debt. When Fosdick came home in the evening, Dick announced his success in recovering his lost money, and described the manner it had been brought about.
"You're in luck," said Fosdick. "I guess we'd better not trust the bureau drawer again."
"I mean to carry my book around with me," said Dick.
"So shall I, as long as we stay at Mrs. Mooney's. I wish we were in a better place."
"I must go down and tell her she needn't expect Travis back. Poor chap, I pity him." Travis was never more seen in Mrs. Mooney's establishment. He was owing that lady for a fortnight's rent of his room, which prevented her feeling much compassion for him. The room was soon after let to a more creditable tenant, who proved a less troublesome neighbor than his predecessor. End of Chapter 23. Chapter 24. Dick receives a letter. It was about a week after Dick's recovery of his bank book that Fosdick brought home with him in the evening a copy of the Daily Sun.
"Would you like to see your name in print, Dick?" he asked.
"Yes," said Dick, who was busy at the washstand, endeavoring to efface the marks which his day's work had left upon his hands. "They haven't put me up for mayor, have they? 'Cause if they have, I shan't accept. It would interfere too much with my private business." "No," said Fosdick, "they haven't put you up for office yet, though it may happen sometime. But if you want to see your name in print, here it is." Dick was rather incredulous, but having dried his hands on the towel, took the paper, and following the directions of Fosdick's finger, observed in the list of advertised letters the name of Ragged Dick. "By gracious, so it is," said he. "Do you suppose it means me?" "I don't know of any other Ragged Dick. Do you?" "No," said Dick reflectively. "It must be me. But I don't know of anybody that would be likely to write to me." "Perhaps it is Frank Whitney," suggested Fosdick, after a little reflection. "Didn't he promise to write to you?" "Yes," said Dick, "and he wanted me to write to him." "Where is he now?" "He was going to a boarding school in Connecticut, he said. The name of the town was Barnton." "Very likely the letter is from him." "I hope it is. Frank was a tip-top boy, and he was the first that made me ashamed of being so ignorant and dirty." "You had better go to the post office tomorrow morning and ask for the letter." "Perhaps they won't give it to me." "Suppose you wear the old clothes you used to a year ago, when Frank first saw you. They won't have any doubt of your being Ragged Dick then." "I guess I will. I'll be sort of ashamed to be seen in 'em, though," said Dick, who had considerable more pride in a neat personal appearance than when we were first introduced to him. "It will only be for one day, or one morning," said Fosdick. "I'd do more'n that for the sake of getting a letter from Frank. I'd like to see him." The next morning, in accordance with the suggestion of Fosdick, Dick arrayed himself in the long disused Washington coat and Napoleon pants, which he had carefully preserved, for what reason he could hardly explain. When fairly equipped, Dick surveyed himself in the mirror, if the little 7x9-inch looking-glass with which the room was furnished deserved the name. The result of the survey was not on the whole a pleasing one. To tell the truth, Dick was quite ashamed of his appearance, and on opening the chamber door, looked around to see that the coast was clear, not being willing to have any of his fellow boarders see him in his present attire. He managed to slip out into the street unobserved, and after attending to 2 or 3 regular customers who came downtown early in the morning, he made his way down Nassau Street to the post office. He passed along until he came to a compartment on which read "Advertised Letters," and stepping up to the little window, said, "There's a letter for me. I saw it advertised in the Sun yesterday."
"What name?"
demanded the clerk. "Ragged Dick," answered our hero.
"That's a queer name," said the clerk, surveying him a little curiously. "Are you Ragged Dick?"
"If you don't believe me, look at my clothes," said Dick.
"That's pretty good proof, certainly," said the clerk, laughing. "If that isn't your name, it deserves to be."
"I believe in dressing up to your name," said Dick.
"Do you know any one in Barnton, Connecticut?" asked the clerk, who had by this time found the letter.
"Yes," said Dick. "I know a chap that's at boarding school there."
"It appears to be in a boy's hand. I think it must be yours."
The letter was handed to Dick through the window. He received it eagerly, and drawing back so as not to be in the way of the throng who were constantly applying for letters, or slipping them into the boxes provided for them, hastily opened it, and began to read. As the reader may be interested in the contents of the letter as well as Dick, we transcribe it below. It was dated Barnton, Connecticut, and commenced thus: "Dear Dick, you must excuse my addressing this letter to Ragged Dick, but the fact is, I don't know what your last name is, nor where you live. I am afraid there is not much chance of your getting this letter, but I hope you will. I have thought of you very often, and wondered how you were getting along, and I should have written to you before if I had known where to direct. Let me tell you a little about myself. Barnton is a very pretty country town, only about 6 miles from Hartford. The boarding school which I attend is under the charge of Ezekiel Monroe, A.M. He is a man of about 50, a graduate of Yale College, and has always been a teacher. It is a large 2-story house, with an addition containing a good many small bedchambers for the boys. There are about 20 of us, and there is one assistant teacher who teaches the English branches. Mr. Monroe, or Old Zeke as we call him behind his back, teaches Latin and Greek. I am studying both these languages, because Father wants me to go to college. But you won't be interested in hearing about our studies. I will tell you how we amuse ourselves. There are about 50 acres of land belonging to Mr. Monroe, so that we have plenty of room for play. About a quarter of a mile from the house there is a good-sized pond. There is a large, round-bottomed boat, which is stout and strong. Every Wednesday and Saturday afternoon, when the weather is good, we go out rowing on the pond. Mr. Barton, the assistant teacher, goes with us to look after us. In the summer we are allowed to go in bathing. In the winter there is splendid skating on the pond. Besides this, we play ball a good deal, and we have various other plays. So we have a pretty good time, although we study pretty hard, too. I am getting on very well in my studies. Father has not decided yet where he will send me to college. I wish you were here, Dick. I should enjoy your company, and besides I should like to feel that you are getting an education. I think you are naturally a pretty smart boy, but I suppose, as you have to earn your own living, you don't get much chance to learn. I only wish I had a few $100s of my own. I would have you come up here and attend school with us. If I ever have a chance to help you in any way, you may be sure that I will. I shall have to wind up my letter now, as I have to hand in a composition tomorrow, on the life and character of Washington. I might say that I have a friend who wears a coat that once belonged to the General, but I suppose that coat must be worn out by this time. I don't much like writing compositions. I would a good deal rather write letters. I have written a longer letter than I meant to. I hope you will get it, though I am afraid not. If you do, you must be sure to answer it as soon as possible. You needn't mind if your writing does look like hen's tracks, as you told me once. Good-bye, Dick. You must always think of me as your very true friend, Frank Whitney. Dick read this letter with much satisfaction. It is always pleasant to be remembered, and Dick had so few friends that it was more to him than to boys who are better provided. Again he felt a new sense of importance in having a letter addressed to him. It was the first letter he had ever received. If it had been sent to him a year before, he would not have been able to read it. But now, thanks to Fosdick's instructions, he could not only read writing, but he could write a very good hand himself. There was one passage in the letter which pleased Dick. It was where Frank said that if he had the money he would pay for his education himself. "He's a tip-top feller," said Dick. "I wish I could see him again." There were two reasons why Dick would have liked to have seen Frank. One was the natural pleasure he would have in meeting a friend, but he felt also that he would like to have Frank witness the improvement he had made in his studies and mode of life. "He'd find me a little more 'spectable than when he first saw me," thought Dick. Dick had by this time got up to Printing House Square. Standing on Spruce Street near the Tribune office was his old enemy, Mickey Maguire. It has already been said that Mickey felt a natural enmity towards those in his own condition in life who wore better clothes than himself. For the last 9 months, Dick's neat appearance had excited the ire of the young Philistine. To appear in neat attire and with a clean face, Mickey felt was a piece of presumption, and an assumption of superiority on the part of our hero, and he termed it "tryin' to be a swell." Now his astonished eyes rested on Dick in his ancient attire, which was very similar to his own. It was a moment of triumph to him. He felt that pride had had a fall, and he could not forbear reminding Dick of it. "Them's nice clothes you've got on," said he, sarcastically, as Dick came up. "Yes," said Dick promptly. "I've been employin' your tailor. If my face was only dirty, we'd be taken for twin brothers." "So you've given up tryin' to be a swell?" "Only for this particular occasion," said Dick. "I wanted to make a fashionable call, so I put on my regimentals." "I don't believe you've got any better clothes," said Mickey. "All right," said Dick. "I won't charge you nothing for what you believe." Here a customer presented himself for Mickey, and Dick went back to his room to change his clothes before resuming business. End of chapter 24. Chapter 25. Dick writes his first letter. When Fosdick reached home in the evening, Dick displayed his letter with some pride. "It's a nice letter," said Fosdick, after reading it. "I should like to know Frank." "I'll bet you would," said Dick. "He's a trump." "When are you going to answer it?" "I don't know," said Dick dubiously. "I never writ a letter."
"There's no reason why you shouldn't. There's always a first time, you know."
"I don't know what to say," said Dick.
"Get some paper and sit down to it, and you'll find enough to say. You can do that this evening instead of studying."
"If you'll look it over afterward, and shine it up a little."
"Yes, if it needs it. But I rather think Frank would like it best just as you wrote it."
Dick decided to adopt Fosdick's suggestion. He had very serious doubts as to his ability to write a letter. Like a good many other boys, he looked upon it as a very serious job, not reflecting that, after all, letter writing is nothing but talking upon paper. Still, in spite of his misgivings, he felt that the letter ought to be answered, and he wished Frank to hear from him. After various preparations, he at last got settled down to his task, and before the evening was over, a letter was written. As the first letter which Dick had ever produced, and because it was characteristic of him, my readers may like to hear it. Here it is. Dear Frank, I got your letter this morning, and was very glad to hear you hadn't forgotten Ragged Dick. I ain't so ragged as I was. Open-work coats and trousers has gone out of fashion. I put on the Washington coat and Napoleon pants to go to the post office, for I fear they wouldn't think I was the boy that was meant. On my way back, I received the congratulations of my intimate friend Mickey Maguire on my improved appearance. I've give up sleepin' in boxes and old wagons, findin' it didn't agree with my constitution. I've hired a room in Mott Street, and have got a private tutor, who rooms with me and looks after my studies in the evenin'. Mott Street ain't very fashionable, but my mansion on Fifth Avenue isn't finished yet, and I'm afraid it won't be till I'm a gray-haired veteran. I've got $100 towards it, which I've saved up for my earnin's. I haven't forgot what you and your uncle said to me, and am trying to grow up 'spectable. I haven't been to Tony Pastor's or the Old Bowery for ever so long. I'd rather save up my money to support me in my old age. When my hair gets gray, I'm going to knock off blackin' boots, and go into some light, genteel employment, such as keepin' an apple stand or disseminatin' peanuts among the people. I've got so as to read pretty well, so my tutor says. I've been studyin' geography and grammar also. I've made such astonishin' progress that I can tell a noun from a conjunction as far away as I can see 'em. Tell Mr. Monroe that if he wants an accomplished teacher in his school, he can send for me, and I'll come on by the very next train. Or if he wants to sell out for $100, I'll buy the whole concern, and agree to teach the scholars all I know myself in less than 6 months. Is teachin' as good business, generally speakin', as blackin' boots? My private tutor combines both, and is makin' a fortune with great rapidity. He'll be as rich as Astor some time, if only he lives long enough. I should think you'd have a bully time at your school. I should like to go out in the boat, or play ball with you. When are you comin' to the city? I wish you'd write and let me know when you do, and I'll call and see you. I'll leave my business in the hands of my numerous clerks, and go round with you. There's lots of things you didn't see when you was here before. They're getting on fast at Central Park. It looks better than it did a year ago. I ain't much used to writin' letters. As this is the first one I ever wrote, I hope you'll excuse the mistakes. I hope you'll write to me again soon. I can't write so good a letter as you, but I'll do my best, as the man said when he was asked if he could swim over to Brooklyn backwards. Goodbye, Frank. Thank you for all your kindness. Direct your next letter to North Mott Street. Your true friend, Dick Hunter. When Dick had written the last word, he leaned back in his chair and surveyed the letter with much satisfaction. I didn't think I could have wrote such a long letter, Fosdick, said he.
Written would have been more grammatical, Dick, suggested his friend.
I guess there's plenty of mistakes in it, said Dick. Just look at it and see. Fosdick took the letter and read it over carefully.
Yes, there are some mistakes, he said, but it sounds so much like you that I think it would be better to let it go just as it is. It will be more likely to remind Frank of what you were when he first saw you.
Is it good enough to send? Asked Dick anxiously.
Yes, it seems to me quite a good letter. It is written just as you talk. Nobody but you could have written such a letter, Dick. I think Frank will be amused at your proposal to come up there as a teacher.
Perhaps it would be a good idea for us to open a select school here in Mott Street, said Dick humorously. We could call it Professor Fosdick and Hunter's Mott Street Seminary, boot black and taught by Professor Hunter. The evening was so far advanced that Dick decided to postpone copying his letter till the next evening. By this time he had come to have a very fair handwriting, so that when the letter was complete it really looked quite creditable, and no one would have suspected that it was Dick's first attempt in this line. Our hero surveyed it with no little complacency. In fact, he felt rather proud of it, since it reminded him of the great progress he had made. He carried it down to the post office and deposited it with his own hands in the proper box. Just on the steps of the building as he was coming out, he met Johnny Nolan, who had been sent on an errand to Wall Street by some gentleman, and was just returning.
"What are you doing down here, Dick?"
asked Johnny. "I've been mailin' a letter."
"Who sent you?"
"Nobody."
"I mean, who writ the letter?"
"I wrote it myself."
"Can you write letters?"
asked Johnny in amazement. "Why shouldn't I?"
"I didn't know you could write. I can't."
"Then you ought to learn."
"I went to school once, but it was too hard work, so I give it up."
"You're lazy, Johnny. That's what's the matter. How'd you ever expect to know anything if you don't try?"
"I can't learn."
"You can if you want to." Johnny Nolan was evidently of a different opinion. He was a good-natured boy, large of his age, with nothing particularly bad about him, but utterly lacking in that energy, ambition, and natural sharpness, for which Dick was distinguished. He was not adapted to succeed in the life which circumstances had forced upon him, for in the street life of the metropolis a boy needs to be on the alert, and have all his wits about him, or he will find himself wholly distanced by his more enterprising competitors for popular favor. To succeed in his profession, humble as it is, a bootblack must depend upon the same qualities which gain success in higher walks in life. It was easy to see that Johnny, unless very much favored by circumstances, would never rise much above his present level. For Dick we cannot hoping much better things. End of chapter 25. Chapter 26. An exciting adventure. Dick now began to look about for a position in a store or counting room. Until he should obtain one, he determined to devote half the day to blacking boots, not being willing to break in upon his small capital. He found that he could earn enough in half a day to pay all his necessary expenses, including the entire rent of the room. Fosdick desired to pay his half, but Dick steadily refused, insisting upon paying so much as compensation for his friend's services as instructor. It should be added that Dick's peculiar way of speaking and use of slang terms had been somewhat modified by his education and his intimacy with Henry Fosdick. Still, he continued to indulge in them to some extent, especially when he felt like joking, and it was natural to Dick to joke, as my readers have probably found out by this time. Still, his manners were considerably improved, so that he was more likely to obtain a situation than when first introduced to our notice. Just now, however, business was very dull, and merchants, instead of hiring new assistants, were disposed to part with those already in their employ. After making several ineffectual applications, Dick began to think he should be obliged to stick to his profession until the next season. But about this time something occurred which considerably improved his chances of preferment. This is the way it happened. As Dick, with the balance of more than $100 in the savings bank, might fairly consider himself a young man of property, he thought himself justified in occasionally taking a half holiday from business and going on an excursion. On Wednesday afternoon, Henry Fosdick was sent by his employer on an errand to that part of Brooklyn near Greenwood Cemetery. Dick hastily dressed himself in his best and determined to accompany him. The two boys walked down to the South Ferry, and paying their 2 cents each, entered the ferry boat. They remained at the stern and stood by the railing, watching the great city with its crowded wharves receding from view. Beside them was a gentleman with 2 children, a girl of 8 and a little boy of 6. The children were talking gaily to their father. While he was pointing out some object of interest to the little girl, the boy managed to creep, unobserved, beneath the chain that extends across the boat, for the protection of the passengers, and stepping incautiously to the edge of the boat, fell over into the foaming water. At the child's scream the father looked up, and with a cry of horror sprang to the edge of the boat. He would have plunged in, but, being unable to swim, would only have endangered his own life without being able to save his child.
"My child!" he exclaimed in anguish. "Who will save my child? $1,000, $10,000 to anyone who will save him!"
There chanced to be but few passengers on board at the time, and nearly all these were either in the cabins or standing forward. Among the few who saw the child fall was our hero. Now Dick was an expert swimmer. It was an accomplishment which he had possessed for years, and he no sooner saw the boy fall than he resolved to rescue him. His determination was formed before he heard the liberal offer made by the boy's father. Indeed, I must do Dick the justice to say that, in the excitement of the moment, he did not hear it at all, nor would it have stimulated the alacrity with which he sprang to the rescue of the little boy. Little Johnny had already risen once and gone under for the second time, when our hero plunged in. He was obliged to strike out for the boy, and this took time. He reached him none too soon. Just as he was sinking for the third and last time, he caught him by the jacket. Dick was stout and strong, but Johnny clung to him so tightly that it was with great difficulty he was able to sustain himself. "Put your arms around my neck," said Dick. The little boy mechanically obeyed, and clung with a grasp strengthened by his terror. In this position Dick could bear his weight better. But the ferry boat was receding fast. It was quite impossible to reach it. The father, his face pale with terror and anguish, and his hands clasped in suspense, saw the brave boy's struggles, and prayed with agonizing fervor that he might be successful. But it is probable, for they were now midway of the river, that both Dick and the little boy whom he had bravely undertaken to rescue would have been drowned, had not a rowboat been fortunately near. The two men who were in it witnessed the accident, and hastened to the rescue of our hero.
"Keep up a little longer," they shouted, bending to their oars, "and we will save you."
Dick heard the shout, and it put fresh strength into him. He battled manfully with the treacherous sea, his eyes fixed longingly upon the approaching boat. "Hold on tight, little boy," he said. "There's a boat coming." The little boy did not see the boat. His eyes were closed to shut out the fearful water, but he clung the closer to his young preserver. 6 long, steady strokes, and the boat dashed alongside. Strong hands seized Dick and his youthful burden, and drew them into the boat, both dripping with water.
"God be thanked!"
exclaimed the father, as from the steamer he saw the child's rescue.
"That brave boy shall be rewarded, if I sacrifice my whole fortune to compass it." "You've had a pretty narrow escape, young chap," said one of the boatmen to Dick. "It was a pretty tough job you undertook."
"Yes," said Dick. "That's what I thought when I was in the water. If it hadn't been for you, I don't know what would have come of us."
"Anyhow, you're a plucky boy, or you wouldn't have dared to jump into the water after this little chap. It was a risky thing to do."
"I'm used to the water," said Dick modestly. "I didn't stop to think of the danger, but I wasn't going to see that little fellow drown without trying to save him." The boat at once headed for the ferry wharf on the Brooklyn side. The captain of the ferry boat, seeing the rescue, did not think it necessary to stop his boat, but kept on his way. The whole occurrence took place in less time than I have occupied in telling it. The father was waiting on the wharf to receive his little boy, with what feelings of gratitude and joy can be easily understood. With a burst of happy tears he clasped him in his arms. Dick was about to withdraw modestly, but the gentleman perceived the movement, and putting down the child came forward, and clasping his hand, said with emotion, "My brave boy, I owe you a debt I can never repay. But for your timely service, I should now be plunged into an anguish which I cannot think of without a shudder." Our hero was ready enough to speak on most occasions, but always felt awkward when he was praised. "It wasn't any trouble," he said modestly. "I can swim like a top."
"But not many boys would have risked their lives for a stranger," said the gentleman. "But," he added with a sudden thought, as his glance rested on Dick's dripping garments, "both you and my little boy will take cold in wet clothes. Fortunately, I have a friend living close at hand, at whose house you will have an opportunity of taking off your clothes and having them dried." Dick protested that he never took cold, but Fosdick, who had now joined them, and who, it is needless to say, had been greatly alarmed at Dick's danger, joined in urging compliance with the gentleman's proposal, and in the end our hero had to yield.
His new friend secured a hack, the driver of which agreed for extra recompense to receive the dripping boys into his carriage, and they were whirled rapidly to a pleasant house in a side street, where matters were quickly explained, and both boys were put to bed. "I ain't used to going to bed quite so early," thought Dick. "This is the queerest excursion I ever took." Like most active boys, Dick did not enjoy the prospect of spending half a day in bed, but his confinement did not last as long as he anticipated. In about an hour the door of his chamber was opened, and a servant appeared, bringing a new and handsome suit of clothes throughout. "You are to put on these," said the servant to Dick, "but you needn't get up till you feel like it." "Whose clothes are they?" asked Dick. "They are yours." "Mine? Where did they come from?" "Mr. Rockwell sent out and bought them for you. They are the same size as your wet ones." "Is he here now?" "No. He bought another suit for the little boy and has gone back to New York. Here's a note he asked me to give you." Dick opened the paper and read as follows: "Please accept this outfit of clothes as the first installment of a debt which I can never repay. I have asked to have your wet suit dried, when you can reclaim it. Will you oblige me by calling tomorrow at my counting room, No. Pearl Street. Your friend, James Rockwell." End of chapter 26. Chapter 27. Conclusion. When Dick was dressed in his new suit, he surveyed his figure with pardonable complacency. It was the best he had ever worn, and fitted him as well as if it had been made expressly for him. "He's done the handsome thing," said Dick to himself, "but there wasn't no occasion for his giving me these clothes. My lucky stars are shining pretty bright now. Jumping into the water pays better than shinin' boots, but I don't think I'd like to try it more'n once a week." About 11 o'clock the next morning, Dick repaired to Mr. Rockwell's counting room on Pearl Street. He found himself in front of a large and handsome warehouse. The counting room was on the lower floor. Our hero entered, and found Mr. Rockwell sitting at a desk. No sooner did that gentleman see him than he arose, and advancing, shook Dick by the hand in the most friendly manner.
"My young friend," he said, "you have done me so great a service that I wish to be of some service to you in return. Tell me about yourself, and what plans or wishes you have formed for the future."
Dick frankly related his past history, and told Mr. Rockwell of his desire to get into a store or counting room, and of the failure of all his applications thus far. The merchant listened attentively to Dick's statement, and when he had finished, placed a sheet of paper before him, and handing him a pen, said, "Will you write your name on this piece of paper?" Dick wrote in a free, bold hand the name Richard Hunter. He had very much improved in his penmanship, as has already been mentioned, and now had no cause to be ashamed of it. Mr. Rockwell surveyed it approvingly. "How would you like to enter my counting room as clerk, Richard?" he asked. Dick was about to say "bully," when he recollected himself, and answered, "Very much."
"I suppose you know something of arithmetic, do you not?"
"Yes, sir."
"Then you may consider yourself engaged at a salary of $10 a week. You may come next Monday."
$10? repeated Dick, thinking he must have misunderstood.
"Yes. Will that be sufficient?"
"It's more than I can earn," said Dick honestly.
"Perhaps it is at first," said Mr. Rockwell, smiling, "but I am willing to pay you that. I will besides advance you as fast as your progress will justify it."
Dick was so elated that he hardly restrained himself from some demonstration, which would have astonished the merchant. But he exercised self-control, and only said, "I'll try to serve you faithfully, sir, that you won't repent having taken me into your service."
"And I think you will succeed," said Mr. Rockwell, encouragingly. "I will not detain you any longer, for I have some important business to attend to. I shall expect to see you on Monday morning."
Dick left the counting room, hardly knowing whether he stood on his head or his heels, so overjoyed was he at the sudden change in his fortunes. $10 a week was to him a fortune, and 3 times as much as he had expected to obtain at first. Indeed, he would have been glad, only the day before, to get a place at $3 a week. He reflected that with the stock of clothes which he now had on hand, he could save up at least half of it, and even then live better than he had been accustomed to do, so that his little fund in the savings bank, instead of being diminished, would be steadily increasing. Then he was to be advanced if he deserved it. It was indeed a bright prospect for a boy who, only a year before, could neither read nor write, and depended for a night's lodging upon the chance hospitality of an alleyway or old wagon. Dick's great ambition to grow up spectable seemed likely to be accomplished after all. "I wish Fosdick was as well off as I am," he thought generously. But he determined to help his less fortunate friend, and assist him up the ladder as he advanced himself. When Dick entered his room on Mott Street, he discovered that some one else had been there before him, and 2 articles of wearing apparel had disappeared. "By gracious!" he exclaimed. "Somebody's stole my Washington coat and Napoleon pants. Maybe it's an agent of Barnum's, who expect to make a fortune by exhibiting the valuable wardrobe of a gentleman of fashion." Dick did not shed many tears over his loss, as in his present circumstances he never expected to have any further use for the well-worn garments. It may be stated that he afterwards saw them adorning the figure of Micky Maguire, but whether that estimable young man stole them himself, he never ascertained. As to the loss, Dick was rather pleased that it had occurred. It seemed to cut him off from the old vagabond life, which he hoped never to resume. Henceforward he meant to press onward, and rise as high as possible. Although it was yet only noon, Dick did not go out again with his brush. He felt that it was time to retire from business. He would leave his share of the public patronage to other boys less fortunate than himself. That evening Dick and Fosdick had a long conversation. Fosdick rejoiced heartily in his friend's success, and on his side had the pleasant news to communicate that his pay had been advanced to $6 a week.
"I think we can afford to leave Mott Street now," he continued. "This house isn't as neat as it might be, and I shall like to live in a nicer quarter of the city."
"All right," said Dick. "We'll hunt up a new room tomorrow. I shall have plenty of time, having retired from business. I'll try to get my regular customers to take Johnny Nolan in my place. That boy hasn't any enterprise. He needs somebody to look out for him."
"You might give him your box and brush, too, Dick."
"No," said Dick. "I'll give him some new ones, but mine I want to keep, to remind me of the hard times I've had, when I was an ignorant bootblack, and never expected to be anything better."
"When, in short, you were Ragged Dick. You must drop that name, and think of yourself now as—"
"Richard Hunter, Esquire," said our hero, smiling.
"A young gentleman on the way to fame and fortune," added Fosdick.
Here ends the story of Ragged Dick. As Fosdick said, he is Ragged Dick no longer. He has taken a step upward, and is determined to mount still higher. There are fresh adventures in store for him, and for others who have been introduced in these pages. Those who have felt interested in this early life will find his history continued in a new volume, forming the 2nd of the series, and to be called Fame and Fortune, or The Progress of Richard Hunter. End of chapter 27. End of story.